Alright, we're going to talk about the art of shimming today. And I'm going to go over pretty much everything here. Everything except I don't seem to have a tap-up plate. So, first off, this is a G&G Combat Machine gearbox. We got an SHS top-up plate here. We've got so this is a Combat Machine gearbox, and then these are GR16 gears. So when things are different, they're not the same brand, you're going to have a lot more shimming issues. We've got a GMP pistol grip here, and this is a GR16, maybe close to Combat Machine. Could be, these are usually the same, so you don't have to worry about that. But there's an issue with these. Here's two different types of motors and two different types of pinions. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit, because there's some differences in that too. Here's a four pistons, and these three right here are. This one's somewhat compromised. This is a garter, but still could be reused. These are pretty much going to be my demo pistons. This one's been pre-engaged. It's a Lonex, Blue Lonex. This one is Modify Ultimate, and this is the most expensive one here of these four. Wood nuts, just buying again because the rack is cracked. I've had two of these cracked so instantly. So this one here is a GMP aluminum, and it's got that explosive piston head set, so it's pretty heavy. But what I'll be demonstrating is how that is actually affected in here. Okay, so we've got a razor blade here. We've got some screwdrivers. I usually just use this one right here, the long flat head. It's very, very nice to have. You got a bunch of various shims in this bag. And then, just to make yourself a lot more precise, you don't necessarily need this, but it does become very helpful to have. You need a caliper. Again, you don't always have to have this, but it's nice to have, to be very, very precise. Now, one of my questions that I had on a questionnaire was, if you're shimming with 0.1 millimeter shims, how much looseness should there be for the gears in the gearbox? So in here we've got this sector gear in here has, if I was to tighten this gearbox with screws, it cannot move up or down. So this gearbox actually takes the special type of shimming that I'm talking about. When we're doing 0.1 millimeter shims, we want to be less than 0.1 millimeter shims. That means if we kept adding 0.1 millimeter until it got too tight, we'd either be really close to zero or just under under 0.1 millimeter. If we had exactly zero, it would be kind of too tight, but at the same time we would be too close to being a number that we don't need. I guess just saying too tight. So for example here, I'm going to keep adding 0.1 millimeter until it has just close to tight, but loose enough to rotate the gears. So if you're working with 0.2 millimeters, then you're kind of screwed, and you're only working with 0.2 millimeter, less than 0.2 millimeter. This is why it's good to have 0.1 millimeter. Now I'm going to explain how the caliper becomes very handy right now. I have noticed, and I'm sure some people are going to comment about this, that the shims from different shim sets are not exactly what they're stated to be. So if they're 0.1 millimeter, so they're sometimes 0.06, 0.07, 0.08, 0.09. With this thing, after you're done shimming, let's say one gear like let's just say, for example, the sector right here. I'm going to go ahead and label these out. We've got the bevel, we've got the spur, and then this one right here would be the sector. Just to kind of label the names out here. So we're going to set these aside. Now let's put the sector in there. And let's just suppose that I need to shim this with 0.1 millimeter. Now I already said I can't put any shims on this, okay? But let's just suppose that I could do that. So I close this up, I screw it down tight. The screws are on the opposite side. Yeah, it's a G&G gearbox shell. Kind of a pain in the ass to have to do that, but you rotate, you turn it over and you screw it in. And then you check your sector gear by pulling it up. And you can also check with the screwdriver. Now, the safe rule is if you can see it come up just the slightest bit, you're okay. Now, another thing is you can also rotate it, or spin it, excuse me, spin it with the finger. Now, upon experience, you're going to know how much that kind of needs to spin, but there's a lot of factors that come in place. But before I get to that, let's talk about the 0.1 millimeter shim. So as long as I see a tiny bit, or the spin is still there without resistance, then you'd be good to go. And if you're working with 0.2 millimeter, then you couldn't do that. So you would actually have your gear going up and down in here, or side to side it would be called, because your gearbox would be shot this way. So alright, let's take this out and kind of talk about the way I shim, because this is what really helps. If there's a lot of grease and debris on this, it will affect your shimming. And I can say, even with a lot of experience, the stuff on it could affect your shimming. Now, what I do is if I'm going to reshim a gearbox, I'm going to take out all the gears, take off all the shims, and I actually wash these with Dawn or some kind of, you need to wash them and dry them immediately. They're not going to really show any rust, but I mean, you just need to dry them after you're done washing them. With Dawn or some kind of maybe Goo Gone or something, to remove all that grease, and that they're nice and shiny, so you can see kind of here. You don't really want to remove the heat treatment on there, just get out the grime. Okay, so the reason for this is that when you go to check the shimming, you don't have any of that debris or any grease that kind of prohibits the spin. So for instance, right here you can see it spins a little bit better. Now, thing to note about spinning is you need to know why it spins more or why it spins less under certain conditions. I'll take this gearbox shell, for example, over here. Now I've done some dremeling right here because there's a line to the tap-up plate that holds it in place. There's an inner line right there. However, there's one back here. Let's kind of show a little bit closer. So, well, what happened is the sector gear's tap-up cam right here, this piece, would hit into that because this is the way it is in the gearbox. And when spun, it would hit into it. And remember, I said I couldn't shim put any shims on that, so I couldn't get away from that. I couldn't put any on the top of this here to get away from this location. So I've had to actually Dremel that a little spot off. So the tap-up plate, it's not going to affect the tap-up plate at all. You can see that. There's no way it's going to. So that way we don't actually have the, when we shoot this isn't going to bump into it and create a problem. See how that spins very well. Okay, so when I turn it over and I spin it, it spins differently. And ask, why is that? You have to know why. When you look at the bottom of this sector gear, there is a little indentation for the cutoff. I'm not sure what we call that. I always forget the specialized words here. This indentation is actually rotating around the gearbox shell. It's a little bit longer than the bushing, or bearing, excuse me. In this case, it's 8mm bearings. Okay, so I drop this in here, and as I rotate it, you can hear it has resistance against the shell. So in this case, you know that's going to happen in the other shell, because this part is just, this side is just going to be on that bearing. So that's something just to notice, is kind of trying to come up with the good word here, but gosh, I can't think of that word right now that I want to use. You want to make sure that there's a lot less material for the gear to touch just the bearing or the bushing and not the gearbox. Plus, you also want to make sure it's parallel. See, look at how much that spins. It's outrageous. It's still going. Still going. So here, what we could do is, if I Dremel just a tiny bit, I mean just a tiny bit off this lip right here. You want to leave the lip intact so it still hits the cutoff, but you just want a tiny bit off so that it's not grinding against or touching the gearbox shell at all. And then it would spin just like that. No problem. So I get a maximum spin. Okay, so another thing to talk about, and I think this is very hilarious. People I've read in the forums, and I think this is hilarious. People are shimming their gun so that as long as they're holding it like this and shooting it, it won't be a problem. But as soon as you shoot sideways, the gear actually falls. So I'll give you an example. Here's your bevel gear, and this will be put in here. And then you've got your motor, and it comes up in here, and it applies a little bit of force to the bevel. Now, depending on the brands and so forth, it could apply a lot of force. It could depend on your shimming. It could apply less force. So what you want is your bevel to be parallel and not really have any force on it. So you can see as I do this, it lifts up the bevel a little bit. But what they'll do is, as an example, is just put shims only on the top of this bevel. So they'll leave the rest looseness. So when this comes in, this pushes it up. And what that really does is it kind of angles the pinion to the bevel like this, and it gives it a little bit of a different noise as you shoot it. The reason for that being is because of the angle. You can kind of see here and kind of see here that the angle would be a little bit different coming in. However, that's not the proper way to shim it. That's not proper at all. You should have shims on the bottom and top. This should be very parallel as possible. Because a good example for that is if you look at this gear, or this, the pinion on this motor, the only markings are in between the teeth. So what that means is what you have here, like I was going to say earlier, is an example between pinion gears. This one is a little bit fatter, and this one is a little bit thinner in between the teeth. Now, because of that, this pinion gear is just becoming part of what this would be. And you could just take this off with a pinion pulley, which I could have done. I could have easily done that and put it on here. But this is a little bit better heat treated. this is probably a lot better overall. I've seen where you put this in and the pinion starts to come stripped so easily, or a tooth chips even at the proper height adjustment. And the reason for that is the material. You put something like this in, it doesn't happen that way. But what we're seeing here is the between the teeth is not wide enough, but this is. And that's the only type of marking we're seeing on the motor. And that's the only type of marking we should ever see. We should never see these teeth really, we should always see them straight at the angle that they start, and never like a banana. I mean, I've seen some pictures of where they really curve and so forth. They're not supposed to curve at all. So you should have this exactly parallel with less than 0.1 millimeter where it can move side to side while in the gearbox. So when you move your motor up, you're just getting right underneath it. Let me use the other one because that one's got a spring on it. You're just getting right underneath it. There needs to be a tiny-ish gap. If it's pressed against it, that's actually not good, and I've found several tests that show that's not what you're supposed to do. So you're supposed to be just a tiny bit underneath it, underneath the level. Okay, so a big conception here when you're shimming the gearbox, and this is kind of to make it a little bit easier for everybody to understand. If you have the gears free flowing in here, like you've got them perfectly shimmed, they don't hit anything, they spin perfect, they don't have any resistance, so they get their maximum spin, and they don't bump into anything. You close up the gearbox, you put it in the body, you put the pistol grip on, you go to shoot it, and you start having problems. There's a conception here that it's always different when you get it in, and because of the AEG spring, okay, there's a different type of resistance on it. That's actually untrue. What it is when you put everything together, there is meshing difference. There is still a shimming difference. If you actually copy exactly, if you make holes in this gearbox and in the body and in the pistol grip, and you look exactly what you're doing when you're finished, you'll see some things change. You'll see the motor doesn't go up as high as you're supposed to have it. You'll see that there's a gap in between the pistol grip and the body, as an example. You will see something with the piston wasn't checked, or the tappet plate. So these actually come into place, and what you have to do is copy the best way while it's the finished product, or you're done with your shimming. So this really takes a really high advanced shimming, and it's not something an intermediate will, if I hand you a gun that has issues with being shimming, you're not going to immediately go, oh, I got it shimmed. You're going to think you do, and you don't. So to get it down in your head, think of the gears being perfectly aligned, perfectly parallel, perfectly with less than 0.1 millimeter of gap for them to move back and forth. They can't get between the teeth of each other and grind, because they're pretty much stayed at that position. So if you can imagine that in your gearbox, smoothly pulling back a piston, pulling back the tappet plate, no resistance on these two, the motor pinion is just level beneath the bevel and within the meshing area, so that would be right here. Okay, if you can get all those factors, you have a perfect shim job, and your gun will sound really nice. Plus, it will last a long time, because it can pretty much last eternity, as long as you don't have other factors like your gun jamming. That could really screw up your gun. Doesn't matter how good of a shim job you have, if a piston can't go all the way forward and the sector goes around, get pre-engagement, wow, because of a gun jam, then you're really screwed. But that's basically Art of Shimming, is making all these factors go together. Now, a lot of people don't check certain things. They don't check the tappet plate. They don't check their piston. They sure as heck don't check the final end result with the motor's pinion to the bevel, and that means overall. That doesn't mean just putting a pistol grip on here and checking. Now the good example for that is because, like I said, there could be a gap. So when this is in the body, let's just give an outrageous showing, but it's like this, just to kind of show. It's like that. Okay, that much of a gap is going to put your motor in a different position. All right, so that's pretty much explained a lot of stuff that could really make your shimming a lot better, and could make you shim like a professional. Now, let's take your gears, and we put some shims on here, and we're going to talk about how to use the tools. Here's a razor blade. A razor blade's really nice. You can just slide right underneath the axle area and pull off your shims, no problem. I don't actually put any grease on the shims until the I'm finally done, and I say that's perfect, because I want to make sure that I'm checking the spin and it's what it should be. There's no such thing as to go off of what kind of revolutions. There's always a different type of number of spins with what kind of bushings you have and what kind of friction. I was trying to think of the word friction. Your axles here could be a little bit fatter. So I mean, don't go off the revolutions. That's just not something to really follow. You really just have to go off experience and spinning it and seeing that, you know, it spins freely. That's how much it should spin. So before I forget, let's talk about the bushings and bearings and kind of making your shell ready to shim properly. First things you can see here, this shell is cleaned. Yes, it's been washed with Dawn. It's been dried. You can see it's very clean. Now, what you want to do is you want to tap out your bearings or bushings and glue them in position. You don't necessarily need to do this if they're in there by torque. This is in here by torque very well, so I don't necessarily need to do that. But if they were to fall out very easily, you know, you just touch it, tap it, hit it, and it just goes falls out. Obviously, you need to glue it in there, and you need it to be as flush as possible. If you don't have it as flush as possible, when you go to shim your gear, when you go to check it, it'll look like it's going straight, but it's not. So when you close up the gearbox, it'll actually feel very loose, but then get hard at one point. So example is it'll be loose here and then hard here. That's because your bushing or bearing is not flat inside the gearbox. You could have had debris in there, and you went and you glued this in. So you want to make sure you sand down the area and then apply the bearing or bushing and glue it in. Now you can use a red Loctite. You can actually use super glue, but both of these things should somewhat hold. It all depends on if the gun jams or something that pushes these bearings really out of place. But for the most part, they will hold in position. Remove that excess, and then you would be at this point where you have them in there. Now, another thing to consider before you put in the bearings and bushings is how you want your gearbox to be ready for when you shim. I've seen people put holes right here in the pistol grip area. They'll drill a hole right there, which is really the most pointless hole I've ever seen. Over here, too. Because when you put the pistol grip up there, are you serious? You're going to put your hole right there? You need to think about where you're going to put your hole. That's not a very good spot. So they'll put the hole here, and then they'll use another pistol grip, but come on. Let's be more professional here, right? So you'll take your gearbox shell, and there's a hole sometimes right here, and that's not a very good angle to see your bevel gear. So you got your pistol grip here, and what you'll want to do is basically probably copy me. I actually cut right here, just to kind of show right here. So you can see that I cut between the post that holds the wiring, but I still leave the post, 2 spots of it intact with the bottom connecting. So I'm not really making or removing the complete integrity of the post to still hold the wiring. But I leave it there so I have an angle. This is a really good spot. Leave it there and big enough so that I can see. You can see here. It gives a good enough angle to look down this way, and you would be able to see your your bevel and your pinion mesh easily. And you can do this with the pistol grip attached. So you can see here, if you were to look down this way with a flashlight, you could easily see it. So, do your dremeling first, and then clean it out, make sure there's no debris, and then you put in your bearings. Sand down the areas, glue them in. Now here, I didn't glue in my bearings because the bushings. I only do it when I'm completely done dremeling the gearbox, because you gotta wash it out sometimes again, or you gotta blow it out with air, and air sometimes doesn't even get it out. If you've got grease and stuff in here, it holds it in there. But you had to see that when I checked the gear, I had to Dremel that, so I had to spend more extra time. Alright, so we got this all here. One thing I have forgot to notice and state is the cutoff lever. That's another part of shimming that you have to look out for. So we need a cutoff lever really quick here. And we might as well take a trigger. Why? Because there could be a trigger problem too. I'll just take this trigger. Well, I guess I won't take that trigger. Just kidding. Okay, so these are some other components that actually could be affecting your shimming, and I forgot to state these, but more importantly, I will try to state everything for the case in point. Alright, sometimes you can tell this trigger is not made for this, I think this is a VFC trigger. It's not made for this gearbox shell, you can tell right away. Look how straight that is. And this would be good for a trigger mod, because you're just doing this, a hair trigger mod. But yeah. Now, with the trigger, some of the triggers would go back a little bit too far and bump into the sector gear. So if you got a different brand sector gear, and there's also forgot to state, is there's some dremeling that was done to this post right here, just a little bit off at the angle. That's the post that holds the trigger box right here. It's not there anymore. The wiring harness trigger box with the contacts in it. But it's been posted off, been dremeled off so that the gear's teeth don't hit into it. Okay, so you may want to look out for that there too. You want to look out for this bumping into the back of the teeth of the sector. And sometimes it looks like it is, or something doesn't look parallel in the gearbox, and especially when you check your shimming, you'll rotate it, and sometimes it feels like it's bumping into something, but when you close the gearbox up, it's not, because it holds the gear centered and it's more parallel when you close it up and you screw it down. So the reason for that is you don't necessarily sometimes have to do these dremeling things, you just have to check it. It's always good to start with 0.1 millimeter on the bottom of the spur gear, excuse me, and close it up and see if it really does have resistance against the gearbox shell. Sometimes it doesn't, and you don't need that 0.2 millimeter, 0.3 millimeter that people think they do. So we're going to go ahead and put this on the bottom here. Now this has been a little bit grinded off. This came from some other gearbox somewhere. I don't even know what this is. Put this in here. I suppose it's not even close to this brand. And it looks like it's been chewed off. It's probably old. It probably went to D-Boys, I'm gonna guess. But because you can definitely tell it's a little awkward. It's kind of grinded in the same area, so these are pretty much close enough to the same. So we go ahead and we drop this in here, and we can already see, even if I put this in the gearbox shell, that's tight. Look at that. So the only way to get away from this is when I go to do any dremeling, I'm going to again Dremel off the tiny bit here off the tip top, so that it has the same friction spinning like this. And then I will also take this and cut off just a layer, just like that with the Dremel. And then when I put this back in, it would spin without having the resistance that it has now. Now, if you could just put shims underneath it, you could just avoid having to clip this at all. You know, taking off a layer off of it. But that would even be the same here. You wouldn't even have to, you know, take off a little layer here. You wouldn't have to because you could move this. But in this case, I'd have to. I'd be forced my hand into that situation. Okay, so we talked about the trigger. We talked about the cutoff. How can we talk about the tappet plate and the piston? Now, I don't know if you guys know this, but I actually do a special type of check with the piston. I'm sure people do know that they can check just by putting this in the gearbox and rotating their sector gear. See how easily that flows? However, certain things about different pistons is this one, the pickup tube has been dremeled down a little bit, shaved down a little bit. Because if you look at some of the other ones, it doesn't come up as high. The one on this one came up a lot higher. So when you put it in here, it was actually incompatible. Incompatible, yeah. And if you were to check it, like you need to check it. Some people just put it in there and assume it goes, but it doesn't work that way. Close it up, screw it down, and you push the, you'd have your bevel gear here and you rotate that with the spur once you've got this shimmed. You check your pinion and see if it goes back the way it's supposed to. See, it's got resistance. See that? Open up our gearbox here and see what is going on with the resistance here. Well, it's at a different tooth location. Okay, so what we need is the gears to rotate, like I was saying. But if you've got it locked down here and you feel some kind of resistance, it's not smooth, you can actually pull this off and check and see why. Now, it could be, here's a great example, is these Lonexes. They've got some plastic teeth in the back and then they've got some metal. Now as this runs up against that, you got it closed, there could be no resistance right here at this point. And then once it gets to the metal tooth area, there is. And you can see here there kind of is. See, it's having a little difficulty. So if I close this up and the same thing happens, what I actually do is I take this out and I shave down the tiniest bit so that when I put it back in here, I mean the tiniest bit. You only want to round until it's smooth. Now, it could be your rack right here is not all the way in, but if your rack is and you're still having it not move smooth, you don't have to necessarily do this, but if you want it to be, you know, as flush and smooth as possible as that piston goes back, then you would do something like that. So as we rotate this, you can see there's a little bit of bump resistance right there. You could actually even go for the gear if you wanted to, but I wouldn't probably suggest that. And you rotate this, and let's say you fix that problem area and it becomes straight again, it would do that. It would be so flush. Now I've actually, on some of the pistons, I've had to go all the way across because of this rack. Now it's not this one. This has been dremeled for other reasons, but it was for testing. And just basically because when I looked at it, I was like, oh god, I need another tool than a Dremel because that's got some serious metal on there. But there's an example of the piston. You have to check it and make sure that it's not pressing down on the sector. This one would have been. If all the teeth are pressing down on the sector, just take out the piston. Don't use it because it's just not going to be any good to grind down all these teeth and all this teeth here. Just because it's actually pressuring the sector. That's going to be a lot of material removal, and that's just not going to work in the long run. So just take it out, get a different type of piston until you get one that is compatible with your gearbox. Okay, you could even avoid what I've said, like dremeling or shaving down the teeth a little bit. If you have to, grab another piston and check it. Okay, so let's see, this one flows through there nicely. Then you would say, hey, I want to use this one. But make sure it doesn't have any cracks. And cracks could be still kind of usable. This one could still be usable because this is still flush, still straight. However, there's some material down here because this had been pushed up. The gear was just not going straight through here, and cracked the tooth rack, and then just pushed it up into the piston. So that would have to be kind of removed a little bit so that your spring could go through there without creating a problem. Well, look, it's not creating a problem right now, so this could probably still be reused. Okay, so check your slide rails. Gotta have to make sure that your piston can slide back and forth very easily. What you want to do is put your piston in, close your gearbox shell, tighten it down, and make sure that it does. You can see right here, this is incompatible. See that? That is totally incompatible. There's no way that could be used. Here's a Lonex. See, you can see right away that that would be creating you an issue when you go to shoot your gun. Modify incompatible with this gearbox shell. You can see it gets tighter towards the back. So let's go here forward. And it gets tighter as you go to the back. See, just totally incompatible. So that's why you got to check your slide rails. You don't really want to modify your slide rails, so you'd rather modify the piston. Unless I guess you're just planning to always buy that piston, but the best thing is to do is just do the piston, because you may get to a point where you have to buy a different piston and you already modified your slide rails, so you kind of screw up. Okay, so let's go ahead and put this piston in and just kind of check it, because I think this is the one I'm going to use for the example. Look at that. That moves even better than those two. So, all right. So we can see the difference between brands is they kind of create problems for you. Let's go ahead and put the sector gear in and talk about the tappet plate shimming. Now, I'm not probably going to have a tappet plate problem. However, this is SHS. It could be a little bit too wide, and we should check that first. You should always check a part to make sure it can be installed properly without doing any modification. Okay, there's always little things to check for it. You can hear it. If I hold this really tight, another way to check is to see how much left and right it can go. Okay, this is definitely not going to have a problem. Does it go back far enough? Yes, it does. Does it go forward far enough? Yes, it does. You also want to check the, basically, if you have the previous part, check between them and see if there's any differences, because it may actually affect how your gun shoots. Okay, so we know this is good to go. I don't have to do any drilling on this one, thank God. I had to do some drilling on another one. But let's go ahead and drop this in here. Now, if there's a bunch of shims on the bottom of this, what happens is this comes up higher. And the higher that comes up, it actually pressures the tappet plate into the gearbox like this. And if you've got the gearbox closed and screwed shut, it can't move because it's pressure to it, or it's very hard. It'd be like, it'd be like this. It just cannot move. So what you want to do is definitely remove enough shims from the bottom that it gets away from the tappet plate, so the tappet plate can go back. And the only way to check it again is you have to close it, you have to screw it shut. Okay, that is the only way to check it properly. Now, hopefully for us, we don't have an issue, and I'm pretty sure we wouldn't. Yeah, we don't have an issue. This goes back and forth, no problem. You could even put the spring on here and feel the resistance as you rotate this. So you know what resistance to look out for here. This would be okay resistance because it's spring tension that goes to the tappet plate. It's normal. That's something normal. You can't prevent that type of resistance hitting your sector gear here. You also want to check your cam is hitting the selector plate the right way. Now, to check and see that the shape is in fact right, or if you need to delay, you could put your piston in here, and as you rotate this, see where it will put the tappet plate forward. So that's plenty of time right there to get a chambered BB in there. And as you're going, you can still see there's still a lot of time before it goes forward to hit. So why would you need to delay sometimes? Why wouldn't you? It depends on where this starts and how big this material and this tap-up cam is. Sometimes it's a little closer to your release tooth, and sometimes the older gears are actually much further away. So it makes you have to use a delay clip, and sometimes you do not. So in this case, you could get away with not using the delay clip, just from what we could see right there. Now, the faster this does move, you probably will need a delay clip, depending on how fast it moves. But again, it really depends on the tap-up plate cam here, where the location is, how thick it is, and how it hits this. And to be like, hey, I'm for sure got it covered, you could just go ahead and put it on there, but make sure you check to see how it flows in here. Okay, so we've pretty much talked about that. I've pretty much gone over so much right here in this area that should be helpful for anybody. But we're going to go ahead and make sure that you really understand the issues that could be created here. So you've got this gearbox should fit this. This, for example, this is a plastic gearbox shell, or we call it the lower external receiver. And we would put this in here, screw it up tight, put it in here, and pop the pins in it so it's locked in where it's supposed to be. And then watch your gearbox shell, the bottom here, and your pistol grip. And if you put that up there, you look down and you can see that it's not perfectly centered. Okay, it's going off at an angle. You want to correct it and make sure that there's no gap. However, we can see there's a gap here. There's a complete gap here. See right here, watch here, and between the pistol grip. You can see there is a gap in there. See that? So that is going to be a problem when you go to shim. Now you could cut the top of this layer off right here. I'm trying to go faster because video's trying to cut me off, but I will edit this video so it will be longer. You could cut and shave this off a little bit so that it actually comes up flushly. Now you'd have to be very careful and make that very parallel. So the way I actually do this is different. What I do is I put the screw up in here and I put shims on top of it until it sits flushly against the body. Now if you put too much, it will actually be like this, and you want to put too much so you can see and keep lowering and lowering until you get the perfect gap. Then you take those shims out, you keep them, and you would do the shell with them. So you put the shims back on, you put it on here like this, and you're basically copying what would be in there, and you could see where your motor is really at. Now if your motor has a long spring, what will happen is when you put it up there as high as it needs to go, because of that freaking gap, the spring in here could prevent it from going up the highest it needs to. So you take the spring out of this right here and you just clip off a tiny bit until you get it the right location. So that's the way I actually do it. But you could shave down the pistol grip. So here's another pistol grip, and it looks like this one is a little bit higher. So there'll probably be a little bit of a gap difference. You may not even have one with this pistol grip. So it all depends on the pistol grip and the lower gearbox receiver, or the lower body receiver. So I'm going to go ahead and pause for a second, then we'll get back into this. Okay, sorry about that. It's kind of a pain in the ass to have to stop my camera, but let's go over the bevel to pinion shimming. So you've got your bevel here, and I'll explain the process to shimming it correctly. First, you want to find out how many shims go on top and how many should go on the bottom. You're going to find out second. But first, you need to find out how much up and down movement you have right here, or side to side movement when the gearbox is closed. So you'll actually, this is kind of the process of shimming the gears. You'll close this up, you'll screw it down on the screws near this area. As tight as you can, not over tighten, just tight to where it's supposed to go. And then you'll check your bevel gear. Now I use this, and I pull it up. You can see there's a lock there, and I'll rotate it. So there's a lot of shims that need to go on the bottom and top, but basically just put them on the bottom for now. Just put them all on the bottom. You're just finding first off, you're just finding the amount of shims you need to fill the gap in here for the bevel to be perfectly shimmed on the amount of space. So once you figure that out, let's just give an example. It's from what I saw, maybe it's 0.6. So you've got 3.2s, for example. Okay. With 3.2s on there, you could divide that up and have 0.1 and 0.5. And you would start with 0.1 on the top here. Put the 0.5 on the bottom. Close her up. Screw it down so it's tight. And then you're going to apply the pistol grip. Now if you found a gap, you're going to do what I said. You're going to put the shims on top of your pistol here. You're going to slide this up, and it's going to be at the same spot. And when you apply this in, you're going to look through this peephole, the one that I've created or you have, and see where it meshes against the bevel. A test you can do is with your screwdriver. You can actually test side-to-side movement like this between the teeth. Now if you have just a little bit, that means that it's not too tight. If you can't rotate, not rotate, but if you can't turn this a little bit at all, you can't even, there's complete resistance. You cannot move it at all. You've got it way too tight. Basically, if it moves way too much, then it's definitely too loose. So you would take this all apart, open this up, and you would take another 0.1 millimeter from the bottom here and add it to the top. A friend of mine likes to call that flip-flopping. Kind of makes sense because you're flopping it over, your shims back and forth. But so we'd have your pistol grip here, and when we go to check this, there would be just a little bit of movement here. Now you could keep adding until it gets too tight where you can't fill it. Then once you get to that point, you could take this all apart, take off that 0.1 millimeter and put it on the bottom, close her up, and now you don't have to worry about adjusting this any more different. The reason for that being is because you've already got it at the meshing point. So, and you know that you don't need to go up or you don't need to go down because it's pretty much in the exact point area, or we call it the sweet spot. Okay. In the final result, though, if you have something like a watt meter, you can actually put this up or down, or if you're really good and you know what the sound should be, you shoot it and you might go up or down just a turn. So that's how close spot on you'll be. You want to be as close spot on as possible. So, alright, so let's go ahead and open this up here. And now we'll show what it should be looking like inside the gearbox shell when you put these things together and you get them flush. Alright, so here's your bevel gear. Now some people say go ahead and attach your pistol grip here, and this is how you would find your when you put your motor in here. This is how you would find that it's actually at the right location. So the pistol grip would be there and this would be in here. Let me use the other one so I don't have to use the spring. And it'd be like right here. Okay, kind of have to zoom up for this in a second. But I would not recommend using the pistol grip like this. I used to do this a lot this way, and the reason I don't do it is because the gearbox shell can move around a little bit. Even if you have it on there screwed very well, it's not straight. It'll be like angled or something, so that can really mess up the final result. So you really want to close it up completely, screw it down tight, because you're copying what it's going to be like when you're finished. you put those shims on there for this pistol grip. And if you have a motor cage, it would be extremely easy because you don't have to mess with this stuff. You just attach the motor cage and check your motor pinion. But we would put it there and we'd basically copy it, so this would be straight and level. There's no way this would be really going back and forth. Put this in there and put it at the proper location. But to show what the proper location is, let's go ahead and zoom up here. You get really close here. Alright, so we've got our motor coming in here. Now the back of the motor, you can see, has a little bit of these little like triangle shape because they kind of been cut. I don't know why G&G has them like that. It's not anything to do with, if you buy them brand new, they're going to be just like that. It's just the shape of the pinion. Look at the shape of this pinion. This is the Looseness. It doesn't have it like that. Okay, it's actually behind it in the back. So this comes off with one on top, but this one comes off in the back because it doesn't have it on the top. This has it on both. You can actually see a little triangle shape in the back and on top. It's just the way it's cut. So it's the way it's made. And between these two, this one is longer. You can see the teeth are longer and they're not as fat. So it's going to have to, when you shoot this in the gun, it's going to have a little bit of whine trying to make it fit more meshly. This one's going to have a little bit less whine because it fits meshly on just that pinion. If you take this off and put it on the other motor, you would be okay. And like I said, if this doesn't have very good quality, you could just do the other pinion as long as you get it as close to perfect as possible. So you want to mesh it right about there. Okay. The angle on this, there is a tiny bit of space right here. So your angle doesn't show that for me, but what you should be able to see is the back here. Is these teeth, they don't go down into. This would be too high. Even right here would still be too high. And the reason for that is those teeth, sometimes they are a little bit pointy at the very tip. And so it points down into the bevel gear, and it creates it creates a problem where you can't see if you've got it shimmed properly or not. So you want to be just about right here. Just the tiniest bit. That's where you should be. So this one, get the spring off there. This one would be right there. Same location, just down a little bit further. Okay? That's where you want to be. Put the spring back onto this Looseness. So that's where you want to be. If I can get it back on, sheesh. It's on there pretty tight, so I have to push it down. But that's where you should be on that location, and that is pretty much everything. Between the teeth, let's talk about that because that could be pretty important. Let's back out a little bit here, just a little bit. Okay. So this is your first shimmed job, and you're trying to shim between the gears. Okay, so where is this? Oh, it's right here. Okay, so you've got your spur gear down here. It needs at least 0.1 millimeter. We can tell already. It needs at least 0.1 millimeter. We put this bevel in here. And let's say we already added that 0.1 millimeter here, and it would spin a lot better than this. We want to know the gapping difference between these teeth and this teeth. Now, you don't have to be just 0.1 millimeter, this 0.1 millimeter higher than this section, so that it gets the most contact. That doesn't need to be. That's only when you go in with the pinion and the motor. The pinion and the bevel. Because if this isn't close enough or in the right location, this is what's rotating. However, let's say you put 0.2 millimeter on here, and you still got at least 50% contact. I say it as a percentage, so let's show here on the camera. So you turn your gear over sideways. So here we can see the contact. All right, so this right here would be, that would be 100%, but it's touching, so as this would turn, it would create marks. So here's example marks right here on the top, and you don't want that. Now, if this bevel can't go up or down, then you may at some point have to also Dremel a small bit off of this, just a layer, so that this could fit in there flushly. But again, it all depends on your gears and the way they're made, if they got the proper spacing or whatnot. So let's say between the teeth of these two gears, you put 0.1 millimeter on the bottom of this, so it pushes it up this way from this one. So let's say it's like that. Well, there's a percentage right there you can see, a small little percentage. That's probably about 75%, I'm just going to say as an example. That's just as good as if you had your gear close to 50% once the gearbox is closed and whatnot. Now you're going to say you want as close as possible, 0.1 right here. Okay, you would want to get it as close as possible if you could, but the main thing is to avoid having the gear grinding down on top of something else. The only contact it's supposed to have is between the teeth. Okay, so let's go ahead and take this out. Let's go ahead and take this out. That's a pretty long video. That explains pretty much everything. I don't think there's anything I really missed. If you have your motor cage and you're doing a version 3, this would be so much easier. And I think that's pretty much everything. When you go check your shimming, always close the gearbox up with screws, tighten it, and check your shimming with your finger. Use a tool, check up and down movement with the gear. And when you spin it, check your resistance. Basically, even with knowing all this, what makes you shim good is you. Okay, it's part experience, but also part skill. The experience comes in play when you know, hey, I remember that was shimmed too tightly from a different gearbox, because you know that's what the spin resistance shouldn't look like. Or that's just an example. The experience is kind of you've done it so much, you know. But skill is getting it there and realizing before having to use experience. So, example is putting this in. I've never experienced the sector gear having no shims. So it's just a skill to be able to do that, basically. I guess that's how it would be best to explain it, because it's something I've never experienced, but I'm actually showing that I can still do it properly with skill alone, realizing it. So you're going to just want to test everything at the final result. You can break in your gears. However, I don't think it's necessary. It's only really necessary if they don't mesh properly. You've got different brands and so forth. And so the teeth, like on a bevel versus a spur, let's say they're different brands, don't mesh really good, then when you go break it in, it'll mesh a little bit faster, just simply because you can have it rotating a lot more without the spring in there in the upper assembly area to your gearbox. So I think that explains pretty much everything here, but it comes down to you, how good you can make it. If you can't tell, you put 0.1 on there, and I already said you can't do that. So if I put 0.1 millimeter on there because I think that it's still too loose, and I close it up, and there's just a little bit of resistance, and I can't tell, well, then that's going to be on me. It's not going to be on the tools and stuff, because I look at it, and I'm using the tools, and I still say, you know what, it's not tight enough yet. It's still too loose, so I put 0.1 millimeter, and then it's tight, and I can't tell. That would be on me. So the shimming comes really down to you. Experience helps, skill really helps, but overall, it's going to come down to you. It's not going to come down to your tools doing everything, checking for you. I mean, I can check without a tool. Just use my finger. See the spinning resistance and so forth. The tool does help to see it. You can see the gear cannot come up at all. So just a little bit of a note, when you do bushings and you do bearings, sometimes the bearings have a little bit of a gap in them. They come down or go into the shell. So when you shim it, because of this reason, it's not exactly 100% flat all the way across. When you go to shim it, sometimes you can get it a little bit tighter because of that. So you need to just kind of notice and take note. It's kind of the same thing as what I talked about before. You got to know how your gear is supposed to spin, and if it has resistance or the friction's different. Like this example, it'll spin different on one side than it will on another. You just need to know that, and then make your modifications or whatever not. So basically that's everything explained. You'd have your cutoff in here. You have this in here. And then you'd have this in here. And then you'd have the other stuff in there, but you can kind of see all that stuff should be moving very flushly. Now that different clicking noise can be from your anti-versal latch hitting the bottom of this teeth and locking in here. And it's going to be louder depending on how hard that spring is or the angle that it comes in and hits these teeth. But it's pretty rare you'd have to shim your anti-versal latch. I just kind of want to bring that up a point because it's, I would think, extremely rare that your anti-versal latch would be not touching within here somehow. Okay. Maybe it gets like a 50% or a very low amount. It touches like right here. That's kind of tough for the anti-versal latch. So maybe you'll shim it up a little bit. So it's like right there. But that's very rare, and it doesn't really affect the way your gears spin. So, but I think that's about everything explained. Very helpful video for anybody. I don't think there's anything else that could be stated on this other than making sure everything's parallel in the gearbox. You could also check your gear just for a last example. Maybe you think you're, if you spin this here, it looks like the axle is a little bit bent as you spin this here. And if you spin a spur gear, it doesn't look like it. Bevel gear, it doesn't look like it. So you're kind of doubting yourself, is this bent or not? And when you rotate it here, you can kind of see it, maybe it is. But if you check something like spinning it, you have it stand like this and you check with a caliper, it still might look bent because it depends on how they cut these off. Sometimes they cut them off and they're not flat, and so you can't really tell here. The best way to tell is when you put this in the gearbox and you do put your piston in there and you check it with it closed and screwed shut, it will actually have its resistance, and when you open it up you can see that there's a problem, and you can double check. But you can also take your gearbox shell here, close it up, tighten it down, and watch your spurt or your bevel, your sector through this hole here, and see if it is actually going straight. So just an example. Now, I don't know if I stated this earlier, but I'm pretty sure I didn't. This sector gear has one tooth cut off here, and that's on the release side, not the pickup. Usually you do the pickup, but this one's done on the release side. This was done a while ago, and this is a spare. So you can see this has a lot of movement. That's why the gear looks like the axle's a little bit bent. But I think that's pretty much stating everything. I think that's pretty much stated everything. I will, one video pretty soon, show how to shim it. I'll shim it, and somebody can follow me exactly if they want to shim their gun to kind of understand exactly. But this video should be plenty for you to understand. I mean, that's pretty much everything there stated. So just to kind of show, let's go ahead. We didn't do any part of shimming here, but talk about it. Might as well before we end the video. Let's go ahead and grab one of these shims here and check it with the caliper. Okay, so we get 0.15. Okay. Take this off here, and we will go ahead and put that on the bottom of the spur gear here. Oops, don't want to lose it. Yeah, if you lose your shims, then you got to start over on that area. Don't want to lose it. You could just write it down and whatnot. Let's see, hold that on there. See how much better it already spins. Now it's still grinding against something, but again, we'd close up the gearbox and we would see if it does or not. We'd have to put more on top though, and then we'd have to use the flip-flop. Now the reason for that is because if you put it in here and you spin it, it may hit this bearing right here and you don't know. So, but that's basically how we would do this. See how much better it sounds with the bevel in here. Yeah, I think I would put probably a little 0.1 on the bottom of that bevel, because I think it's actually hitting into the spur a little bit. But like I said, once you close up the gearbox, you screw it down, it can be a little bit different. So you've got to check like that constantly, making sure everything is the way it's supposed to be. This, how you can be so precise, not only does it double check, like I was hoping to put 0.1 millimeter on here and it was a 0.15 instead. But let's say you get all your shims off and you check it with a caliper and it's 0.59 as an example. I'm just saying as an example, I probably can't get to 0.59 on with my thumb. Pretty close, but it's 0.60. Okay, so then you know if it goes up just the tiniest bit, you probably need 0.60. And that's so extreme that you probably won't get it, but let's say you have 0.54 and you know it's probably 0.60 is what you need. You could actually go through your shims here until you get close enough to 0.60, and that would even make it tighter, the tiniest bit loose, but it would make it a little bit tighter in here to have a little bit less of a gap, a little bit less of a gap, and that would be as close to perfection as you can get having this. However, it's not necessary. It's just necessary to kind of check your shims and make sure that the numbers that you need are what they are. Let's go ahead and take this off and put this on the sector here. See, the friction is a lot less than if I was just to take this off. There's going to be more friction. See? So, but I can't put any shims on that gear, so I'd have to do some modification instead. Alright guys, that's going to be it for this video. I will make a video pretty soon on how to, I will be shimming along in the whole video to help out. But for now, this video is just basically talking about everything. And so you could refer to this video and then double check everything. So I think that's everything stated. That's a very good video.
it should be very helpful to anyone. And you may want to check, I just remembered something else. This gearbox shell is not reinforced in this area. Some are, and because of that reinforcement, when you put a new gear in there, it bumps into something and you got to trim on the gearbox shell a little bit. So you got to look out for anything. I mean, you could be, look at this pin right here. A pin is going to go through this hole right here, and look how close it is to the spur gear. I mean, you have to be on the ball and notice things like that. That is just extremely close. You're checking your anti-reversal latch hole right here with your spur gear. That's extremely close. But you just want to make sure that the art of shimming it is that with all the components are together, it goes just perfectly spinning parallel and as fast as it can without any resistance. So that's going to be your art of shimming. There's not going to be bumping into anything. It's just going to be the perfect spot, or you're going to have the perfect spot with your bevel and your pinion, and everything else here is going to be perfect and go very fast, make very low noise because it just can't rattle, and everything will fit very nicely. So that's basically everything stated. I don't think there's anything else to state. I think I'm completely done here with this video. So I'll catch you guys later and bump you with a fist.